Welcome to Gray Areas for April 30th, 2024, episode 621. I hear myself in the background, which means we must be live. And we are here with just Cody and Dave. Sean is gone this week because a full cast is impossible.
I mean, there are four of us with competing schedules, and we're all adults and, things. I don't know. Cody looks very relaxed.
I don't have anything to do with my life. My life's basically this show and occasionally working, and that's about it. I mean, I don't really have anything, competing interests. As long as I'm not sick, I guess. So, I don't have anything to do. Sean doesn't really have anything to do either.
What is he doing? Let's air this on.
I think he's at a concert
I believe
in Phoenix.
he's spending his unlimited fortune that he has on concert tickets or something of the sort, because he just has the freedom and money to do whatever he wants. So,
Oh, so that's great. So he's at a concert where he's in my city and decided not to tell me nor see me. Cool.
I guess it's
recording.
implied that he's in Phoenix, right? Because it's obviously not in Flagstaff. So,
And in this particular case, he's not even staying. I think they're coming up late tonight. So it was basically get off work, drive down, go to show, drive up. So in this particular case, I don't think it's their fault for not coming to see you. But there's been other times that it has. So
Dave, I was also in Phoenix like 2 days ago, and I didn't tell you that I went there. So
I was in Phoenix the weekend before last, and I didn't tell you either.
I quit. I'm out of here, guys.
I mean, to be fair, I arrived at the show I went to see the minute it started because I cut it that close. So I really did almost fuck up that. So I just didn't have time.
And I just saw family. I was like, hey, I'm just going to come down for like a night. I'm going to come down midday. We're going to have dinner as this family. I'm going to see my dad for the first time in more than a year. That's a whole sentence that we could decompress, but we're not going to. And then I'm going to go right back up so I can play volleyball that day because I didn't have time in between. So, but I was out there last time. I played with your kids for like 3 hours, so I don't feel bad either. I've done my part.
All good.
I didn't go play with your dog though, which is what my priority actually is. So I should be less comfortable. I look ridiculous.
You do kind of look silly, yes.
You got there. You had the dude vibes going on right there.
I was comfortable, like it's what if I was that comfortable when there was four of us, it wouldn't look as terrible as I'm reclined back that much. But you're right, now there's too much shit showing.
I'm intrigued by my shirt. And for the audio listeners, this is going to be the worst minute of conversation ever, but it looks blue on this camera, but it's actually like, purple, like a sun's color. So
like a sun's color?
Maybe it's the color of blue, like tears, which is basically the sun's new colors.
Right, which is not what we're going to talk about today, to be clear.
No, we're not at all. We're not even starting down that path.
Nope.
And Chris had mentioned maybe the fact of or Sean had mentioned maybe the path of like talking about it next week. I don't know that I even want to.
Oh, we're going to do a season wrap. Trust me.
God.
Best believe.
You have no choice.
But the nice thing is we can basically do it anytime between now and the draft. We've got about 3 months to get to it. So no rush.
Yep.
Instead, what we are going to talk about today, since Sean is not here, we can talk about sports that aren't basketball. And before you're like, ugh, sports. It's not even really about sports. It's more so about the fact that, stadium disputes and greedy ownership and trying to extort taxpayers and stuff like that has been around for a long time. Not a new topic. The only reason it's coming up now is because there's a few things happening in quick succession. One of them is we don't have a hockey team in Arizona anymore. That was just, it felt like that came together in the span of like 2 weeks. And obviously there were a lot of reasons behind that have led to that point and a lot of conversations that led to that point as well. But it just felt like it was, well, maybe they're going to vote in the stadium in Tempe and they're going to Utah. Bye. So in addition to the Coyotes, though, we have the Oakland A's situation this season where they're basically playing out like a lame duck season, and they've shut off replies on their social media because they know they're going to get dragged. And, like, they're in a whole mess. They're playing in front of, like, 4 fans before they move to Vegas. But it isn't even, like, less successful teams like the Coyotes and the A's. Somebody like the Chiefs are not immune to this. Imagine being a Chiefs fan. Your team's really, really successful. You keep winning Super Bowls, and your team ownership's like, yeah, but if you don't pay for a new arena, we're going to leave. So, in general, we want to talk about like sports relocation and just what it means for fans and teams and the league as a whole. And none of us are big Coyotes fans. If anything, Cody probably cares about the Coyotes more than Dave or I do just because he likes hockey. But I used to like the Coyotes back in the late 90s, so like I am a little sad.
I always tangentially wanted to be a Coyotes fan just for the ability to cheer for the home team, because I always appreciate, I'm a Phoenix born and bred person, so I want to cheer for the home team. And when they made that playoff run that 1 year and then got swept by the Kings, I actually kind of got into it. But it's so hard if you don't understand a sport to watch a crappy version of it. And I guess I'm going to start with talking about the Coyotes and their move to Utah. I feel like their deal with Glendale was what happens when the city says, well, we'll just get our money back eventually, so we'll just give them whatever they want. And then all of a sudden, you have a sport that's the least popular of the major four sports, and you're out in a far place away from the center of town where it's difficult to get to for a lot of people on a sport that doesn't happen just once a week on a weekend like football does, which is why the Cardinals work out there. And you have a recipe for disaster, and the city of Glendale basically be like, yeah, we got this arena that we can't fill a lot of times. We do concerts and stuff there now, but we don't want you here, Coyotes. You're costing us money. And so now the Coyotes got screwed because they couldn't draw enough.
And it just doesn't
it was
happen.
A disaster.
It just doesn't happen. I mean, the typical thing is they hold everybody up for taxpayer money and all things like that, and for whether it's new stadium renovations, whatever it may be. And for a city or municipality, whatever, to actually straight up say, you're not worth having is really rare. I mean, Oakland's desperately trying to hold on to the A's, or was desperately trying to hold on to the A's, who have a terrible owner. He's miserable to work with, but they have already lost their basketball team, have already lost their football team, and they're not going to lose their baseball team. So I could see why that city's like, no, we really want this revenue generation and this and that. And Glendale just said, nah, fuck this. It's not worth it. You're late paying us, you don't pay us, whatever it may be. I mean, there's so many ownership issues with this ownership group, and then the three others, technically, that have existed since the Coyotes showed up in 96. And it's just wild that a city would say, nah, take your business elsewhere, and that business ends up resulting in being on a fucking college campus for 2 years.
Yeah, you can argue
not
that
making any money.
You can argue the franchise was sort of snake bit from the start. I mean, when they moved to Phoenix, they're in America West Arena, and there's limited viewing seats. And that was the case for, 7 seasons or so?
Yeah, I think
multiple years. Right. Even when they were decent. I mean, to this day, I can still name the top line of the 98 Coyotes. You know, it's Roenick, it's Kachuk, it's Greg Tockett, it's Jyrki Lume, it's Teppo Numminen. They got Hobby Bowen in the goal. I remember all these names. I remember listening to them on the radio late at night when I wasn't supposed to be. I was listening to Coyotes games when I was supposed to be going to bed when I was in school. I remember all this stuff, but then back then, again, arena that wasn't right for them. They move out to Glendale, and all the issues Dave mentioned crop up. You know, you're not in the center of where your fan base was installed. Your games are played on weeknights, et cetera, et cetera. And now they have to go to a 5,000-seat college arena and pretend oh, yeah, this is going to be fine. And it's not like that. They did that with, okay, this is a one-season thing because the building's being finished. And, of course it's temporary. Hell, we could even spin it as a charming thing, right? For one season, we're going to have a really tight-knit fan experience or whatever. The prospect of that was going to probably be 3 or 4 seasons before a new stadium was even going to reach fruition, if approved. And, of course, even that was a problem because multiple plans for where to put that stadium were shot down. So it's hard to blame. And I saw some folks being like, well, Arizona's not a place for hockey fandom. And I'm like, did it even ever get a fair chance? And even then, it's Phoenix.
Yeah. Also,
I'm not trying to be rah-rah Phoenix. I don't give a fuck about the fact that's my hometown. It's the 5th largest city in the country.
Also, just
they can support hockey.
Yeah, just fuck off with the arguments of hockey doesn't work in the southern part of the country. I mean, for example, Minnesota lost his team to Dallas when we were kids. And that has worked out perfectly fucking fine. The Dallas Stars have been perfectly fine in a big-ass market that draws really well, and Minnesota took years to get a replacement team. So, and where's the city that would be more popular traditionally for hockey? It would be Minnesota, and it took them a while to get a team back. They couldn't even get their fucking name back. They couldn't even be the North Stars again, because Dallas just stayed being the Stars.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the idea that it doesn't work in X market, wherever, the Florida Panthers, again, to me, of the 4 major professional sports, the franchise I would forget exists the most is the Florida Panthers, without failure. They were in the fucking Stanley Cup last year against the Vegas Golden Knights.
The Tampa Bay Lightning have been year in, year out
consistently amazing. One of the best franchises.
Mm-hmm.
Vegas has come on and been great. The Kings have 2 cups in Los Angeles in the early 2010s, mid 2010s. Shut the fuck up with the idea that, oh, well, warm weather places don't work for hockey. It doesn't matter. Vegas got this team, and it's the city fucking loves that team. This shit is everywhere around the strip, and they sell out with their 17,000 beautifully, perfectly built hockey arena. It's crazy how much an arena for hockey specifically is going to generate the correct views and the correct everything, because hockey's a little bit weirder, obviously, than basketball. And the NHL, I mean, I don't know the full story because I was 6 years old when it moved over, but the NHL panic rushed the Coyotes out of Winnipeg to a big market I mean, back in '96, Phoenix wasn't actually even as big of a market it is now. I'm sure
Right.
its population's blown up, but they got it to an emerging market. Good call. But you did it without any long-term plan, which is, again, I'm a little concerned about Utah in the same way because they're actually moving into the exact same situation Phoenix was in with an arena that's a basketball arena and doesn't have sightlines that work very well. But I also think that they have an owner who's owned a professional franchise for a couple years now, and Utah's been, I mean, they're not good anymore, but like Utah's not getting run incorrectly. I think the guy knows kind of what he's doing when it comes to sports management in a way. And the Coyotes had the NHL panic rush that moved them, didn't have an arena, and then had one owner sell it right away, one owner go bankrupt within 2 years. The league took over the team for a fucking decade, which is a nightmare.
Yep.
Then they had another owner, and then the current owner didn't buy the team till 19. I mean, there's legitimately, I believe, 5 owners, including a decade of the league. So the fans didn't get a fair shot. The franchise didn't get a fair shot. You put it here as a placeholder, pulling a team out of Canada because they didn't have whatever arena, this and that. And it's kind of the same shit they did to Quebec with Colorado. The catch is that Colorado landed in an arena that it's been in, I believe, that entire time. They play where the Nuggets play, if I remember right. So it just comes down to what Dave said. The sightlines suck. People are introduced to hockey, and it doesn't work very well in the first arena. And then you move them to Glendale, which for me going to Flag, that's not a big deal. It's fine. It's an easy drive for the 2 hours down. But for everybody else, it might take them as much fucking time as it takes me from Flag to get there from fucking Scottsdale on the east side of the valley, where a lot of the money in the valley actually is to have season tickets. And so it's like, there's so many people to blame. And again, I didn't like the Coyotes. They were one of my main rivals. But I feel horrible for all the people who really, truly dedicated it and blindly were like, no, the team's not going to move. And I'm like, guys, I don't think this is going to work out long term. And you don't want to rub that in people's faces. It's fucking rude. But you start to see like all the Coyotes fans are really deliriously believing what they're getting told. And they were getting lied to the whole fucking time. And it just sucks.
It's kind of then goes into the whole reason that owners in sports started expecting taxpayer funds to pay for all these things. And to an extent, I understand it. The sports do bring, all these sports that come in do bring a vast amount of revenue. And the cities, in a lot of cases, not all, in a lot of cases, do make up that revenue through the tax. Even though they're giving this money out, they're getting much more in sales taxes and hotels and all this other revenue that they wouldn't get otherwise because of the draw of these teams. The problem is when you screw it up so badly like the Coyotes did and have them far out and tell everybody, oh, well, we're only going to have rental cars and hotel rooms pay for this, so you, Maricopa County, aren't going to pay for it. Well, all of a sudden, when you're out in Glendale in the middle of nowhere and hockey isn't a large travel draw, all of a sudden it's like, we're not making this up. This is a problem.
Now you're drawing 9,000, 10,000 fans in an arena that you need to be filling 12 to 15 to be looking good and profitable.
A great arena too.
Yeah.
A great arena for hockey. It was built specifically for hockey, just like Vegas was. But Vegas is in the middle of town.
Yeah.
It's right on the strip.
I mean, and that's what's funny is like I can see why Glendale's arena needed to be refurbished, done and all that. I fucking go in there and I'm like, wait, it's 2 layers and it's just a bowl on top and I can see everything. This place is awesome. I don't need crazy ass amenities that make it, that's what they always want to do. They want to sell seats that are fancier and sell suites and all that to generate real money out of it. And I know that that didn't have some of that stuff because it was a little outdated, but I'm like, from a viewing standpoint, I loved going to Glendale to watch Coyotes Kings games. It was awesome. Also, the presentation that the Coyotes did was great.
It's a good venue. Got lots of restaurants around it, movie theater. Cardinal Stadium's also there. If that had been in Scottsdale somewhere or something that was closer to the hotbed of activity for them, might have worked. Yeah. And by the way, it's a trifling thing compared to everything else, and no one would really care in relative to just losing a team completely. But like, I think about it from this perspective. Shane Doan is like the Coyote because folks like Kachuk, Roenick, others that I mentioned that had big careers there, whatever. We're not there for their full careers. We're not there for the prime of their careers. A lot of times it was sort of like what the Diamondbacks did when they started. Where it's like we got them at a different stage of their career. Shane Doan's son debuted for the Coyotes this year. And it was a cool moment when he got his first goal and his dad's up there with his family and they're all celebrating and he looks like he's on the verge of tears. And like, it's all this stuff. His son is no longer in the Coyotes franchise history. In fact, Shane Doan played for the Winnipeg Jets his first season before they moved. The Winnipeg Jets also are no longer part of that franchise history because they were the Thrashers now before they became the second iteration of themselves.
The history of that.
So the Jets
really
don't have the Jets history, and the Coyotes, even if they get their expansion team within 5 years, are not going to be the Coyotes anymore. So like Teemu Selanne is now going to be the all-time leading scorer for the Utah whatever the fucks, and he's never going to have played a game in any of their uniforms because that's not how any of that worked. It's just fucking weird to me.
I actually think on part of the sale they might have actually held that back. That the Coyotes are technically a deactivated franchise, and Utah's operating as an expansion team.
I thought that they were going to be able to keep all the Coyotes branding and likenesses, logos, color scheme, but not the lineage.
The records and lineage.
I'm not positive. So if I'm wrong, then so be it. But I thought that was what I read somewhere that was the case. And if that is true, then what I've said is like, so like again, like all-time leading scorer for the Coyotes is Shane Doan or whomever. And
it's also bizarre because why Winnipeg's history doesn't just go back to the new Winnipeg extension. Like they did such a weird decision with this one versus how they've operated so frequently in other versions. The only thing that's similar is the Ravens becoming the Browns, or the Browns becoming the Ravens in the NFL, pausing the Browns, but they actually had plans to bring the Browns back immediately. It wasn't a contingent 5-year bullshit thing. And all that. And that's the tricky part is I don't know if they don't bring the team back in 5 years, if this ownership group gets to just keep the Coyotes name in perpetuity, and then if a different owner comes in and it has an expansion team, if it can't be called the Coyotes, because the bummer is that the nickname's fucking awesome. The logo, especially the Kachina version, is one of to me, the best logos in sports. If you know shit about Arizona and its history and vibe, it's exactly what it should be.
Yep.
I mean, the D-backs did a pretty good job being purple and teal, and obviously have moved in and out of all those colors and all that. They should just embrace being a different color. The Coyotes branding is just, it's what it should be for this fucking state. And to lose that, potentially, even if you get a franchise back, I'm really curious how much Coyotes fans are going to embrace the Arizona whatevers it would be if we get a team back in 7 years.
On the flip side of that, I wonder how many casual people who haven't followed this saga and don't understand it will see Coyotes and just think dysfunction immediately.
It's true.
And how much that brand is tied to it. So it's difficult either way you go. Yeah. I think if you start winning right away, like the Vegas Golden Knights did, it's going to cure all things immediately if you do get a franchise.
And the crazy part is Vegas had the perfect guy to be an owner. He's super rich. He took hardly any local money. He and AEG built the stadium on the Strip. He fucking invested millions of dollars to cap out his team to have all these good players and took on shit contracts and draft picks. The guy had lots of money and was like, I want to make a franchise that's really good right away. So he invested it basically every amount of money he possibly could and made the Stanley Cup really quickly and then won a Stanley Cup, last year. It's like, it's crazy how well that works. And granted, Vegas is a unique situation. It was the first professional team they had. So of course, everyone's going to latch on to it. Whereas the D-backs did something similar, paid up, got a World Series, but the Suns have been here and the Cardinals have kind of been here. So I see why the D-backs couldn't catch on the same way. But it's amazing what an owner who just is a rich dude who's willing to spend his money on the vanity project he wanted. It's just crazy what that does for you. It's unbelievable.
Well, and isn't that the difference between old money and new money in sports nowadays? Is that a lot of the new money, the Matt Ishbias of the world, the Vegas owner as well, they tend to be like, I've made my billions elsewhere and I literally can't go broke no matter how hard I try. So this is a project. This is fun for me, basically. I don't care what the cost is, as opposed to the old ownership in sports where their dads or grandpas bought, the Bidwells of the world bought in, and the franchise cost about $500 in 1937, and then all of a sudden it's worth $4 billion, $5 billion today. But that's only on paper. But franchise, they don't have that.
You're
much
not
money.
Liquid. You don't actually have money. Your money is the fact that the valuation of your team says you're rich. It's different when you're a rich guy who comes in with money and is like, well, I made lots of money. If I hemorrhage $40 million a year, that doesn't mean shit to me. I have a hockey team. It's just paying the fee, basically, to be one of the 32 NHL owners. Is I might hemorrhage a couple $1 million a year, but I'm worth $3 billion, so why do I fucking care?
Yeah, it's a vanity project.
One of my planes.
Yeah. And you're right, because, in certain cases, especially with NFL and NBA teams, it's also just an investment, right? We've seen the values of franchises go through the roof. In the case of hockey, it's a little bit tougher because it's not like, well, this huge TV deal is coming, so I know I'm going to make money on it. It's not quite the same. But to that point, it's like it was so frustrating to watch Robert Sarver, not because he was an asshole, which was part of it, but also because it's like, this franchise is going to sell for probably 3 times what you paid for it. And it ultimately
I'm selling
did.
for 10 times.
Yeah, it ended up being even more than that because it was the first time a team had gone on sale in, what, a decade or so? So, like, the hunger for it was there. So it's like, you don't have to penny pinch, and you don't need taxpayers to subsidize your stadium. You're going to come out of this way ahead. So that's why I don't really want to hear about it when you come with your hands out being like, can I have money?
Yeah.
Because now it's like, okay, Chase Field is 25 plus years old now, which is startling because I remember going there a lot when it first opened.
When it opened, I was like, oh my God, the roof opens. This is the coolest thing in the world.
There were times where you and I or with Andy would just go and play pool or whatever in the restaurant in left field. We would just head downtown and go there. Just be like, cool, let's go do that for like an hour and hang out and just overlook at the field and be like, yeah, cool. They're talking about repairs there. And I bet you there's some infrastructure ones that are needed because the building's getting old. America West Arena, formerly known as, it's had, 9 different names since then, currently Footprint Center, at least has had some pretty major renovations. It's got that new entryway area, the new bar, the new entryway into one of the corners, the new practice facility, which isn't there, but helps keep those amenities up. So it's kind of weird to not hear a peep out of them when they have the oldest of the 4 major stadiums in Phoenix. So all of it's to say, like, it's confusing, and it's I have wanted to get back into the Coyotes for a while. Haven't done it. Now, if I was ever going to, that's pretty much out the window. Because why? And I don't even care about them. Imagine if you did care. Imagine if you cared, like, as much as we care about the Suns. Imagine you were out there and you care about the Coyotes that much. Like, fuck, that's terrible.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine this is exactly how it felt in Seattle when all that went down in 2008. Like, I imagine, like, the Seattle Supersonics had a history, I'd say, just about as rich as the Phoenix Suns did. And yet, because of what happened where an owner said, I need this money because I can get it. You're not going to give it to me? Well, I'm going to sell it to this guy who wants to move it somewhere else. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. It's so difficult because what's the atmosphere that has been made now is the team owner can hold a city hostage because the allegiance, this is the same idea that people have when deciding to spend money to go to Disneyland. Your logic goes out the window. Yeah. And so you'll therefore pay whatever it's necessary because the emotions attached to it. And emotions are important. And that's what happens in sports right now, is that basically doesn't matter what the price tag is, you've got to pay it because otherwise you'll lose that emotional attachment. And people, it's hard to do that when it comes to that level of emotion, and owners know it, and they've been taking advantage of it. I don't know if this new generation is going to stop doing that or at least cut back on it, but it's been real difficult in the past 25, 30 years.
I mean, that's the trouble with fandom, is just you get so addicted to wanting to cheer for this team and be fanatical about it that you're lobbying, that you're like, well, what do I give a shit if it's taxes on whatever this and that? It's like, well, we're kind of getting into an age, and again, Vegas is the best example of this right now, that basically the teachers union is like, what the fuck are you doing trying to give that douche who owns the A's $500 million to build a stadium? It's like, no. Like, why would you not invest that into the future of this and that? Because again, expansion teams, which Vegas experienced obviously successfully, and I don't count the Raiders because football is just its own thing. It's so event based and 8 games at home and all that. Vegas's experiences, got a new fresh team, started from scratch, got, owner who always wanted to own a team, built one. Then you have maybe one of the worst owners in sports trying to come in with no intention of actually making this team good. He just wants to not pay for a stadium and have his team be in a city that's probably going to generate a decent amount of attendance without having to pay any money for it. I mean, again, as you said, the man only has money because I believe his family owned the Gap. I believe that's where the money came to own the Oakland A's right now. And it's like, well, that guy doesn't have any concept of actually working for money or anything like that. It's just like, well, his family had a lot of money because they had a clothing company and they bought the A's of all teams. And it's like looking around of, well, how can I maximize the value of this by having other people invest the money? And I mean, as much as Oakland wants to keep the team, he already killed that fan base by having a shit team for so many years.
Yep.
And that's why, like, the D-backs trying to kind of, position Phoenix as like, well, we might have to leave Phoenix. I'm like, I hate to tell you, man, your team's only been around for X amount of years. Phoenix ain't going to give a shit. The D-backs can get shipped out of here, and it'll suck, but right now, I don't think that's going to care. You guys losing the Suns would be fucking catastrophic and horrible because that's the franchise that's established in the city. The D-backs don't have a good enough history to actually try and position themselves in that way.
Despite the fact that they're the only one that's won a championship out of everybody.
Right.
But the Cardinals and Suns are they're not leaving.
Yeah.
Because the NFL is its own thing, and the Suns have too much rich of a history. You're right. The Diamondbacks, despite the fact of making the World Series last year, if they left in the next 10 years, the collective fan base wouldn't like it, but it wouldn't be like man, how did this happen? This is a travesty.
I mean, no offense, we're 3 years out of the D-backs drawing under 20,000, I believe, a year. I mean, I've been to games when they were bad. I mean, I could get tickets for $20 by the Dodgers bullpen, and it was no problem at all. Thankfully, that's not the case now. They're selling for like $40. They made the World Series last year, and things are heading in the right direction. But you haven't built up enough goodwill to do that, and that's like when Chris references the Kansas City Chiefs, that's a problem because them and the Royals both want money to refurbish their stadiums. They're both very old. They probably do need it. But I'm sorry, any NFL team trying to get public money, no. You guys make more money than anybody else without any problem, and you've won the Super Bowl twice. There's no if you can't afford to upgrade your own stadium, you probably shouldn't own the team. I mean, it's just that simple.
There's a bit of greed. I mean, I agree with you. There's a bit of greed when it comes into that because, the NFL, like the Chiefs, the amount of money that Patrick Mahomes has made that owner is, I don't know if it's calculable, very easily calculable at all. And he's getting paid $500 million over 10 years, which is nothing to sneeze at, but his value still is higher than that, which is crazy to me. But again, he's made that much money, but I know his argument is going to be, just to play devil's advocate here, his argument is going to be, well, look what I've done for the entire city of Kansas City. I have made this where it's a destination place for travel. I've made it so people want to come here. The Chiefs fandom is bigger. All the jerseys are selling over the place, and you get sales tax on that, and food, restaurants, bars, all these things around. And he's right. Yeah. However, when you cry, I need money, when you're the most successful team in the league for the last decade, the last 5 years or so, it's like, God, this is really tough pill to swallow. And when you mentioned like teachers,
and that's just the bummer because they're in a position to do that because KC has two teams. It's only the Royals and Chiefs. They don't have basketball. They don't have hockey, and the Chiefs have existed in Kansas City since, the 60s, I think. I mean, they're one of the most original franchises of the NFL, or I guess the AFL since in the AFC. But
I think that's the confusing part now is like we have two very different approaches to this right now with the A's and Chiefs, and yet both are franchises that have been in their spots for a long time and have had quite a bit of success over their tenures. Now, the difference is the Chiefs have never been hotter, and the A's have been run to the ground for a decade, but, there's multiple eras of the A's and several World Series titles where you're like, oh, yeah, because you think back to, the late 80s, and those teams were really good. You got Bash Brothers. You got, Dennis Eckersley. You have, the Moneyball team that was famous, even though some of the most important parts of that team weren't in Moneyball, like Barry Zito. But, there's these different eras of A's baseball that were really, really good, and yet they've been a laughingstock for a decade because their owner's been running them into the ground. So in the past, the only other one I can think of that's similar, the Sonics were still popular when they moved, no question, but they hadn't been good since basically 97. One of the Raiders relocation happened right around their Super Bowl year, right? In the early 2000s.
When they were bouncing between Oakland and LA, you mean?
Yeah.
I believe it was really soon after an early 90s Super Bowl.
But that's the only other one I can think of that happened around a franchise's peak. So to see something like this from the Chiefs is especially startling because, 20 years ago, it used to be if you were going to be a candidate for relocation, it was either because stadium demands weren't being met or because you sucked and a team just wanted to get a fresh start somewhere and they're like, well, the fans aren't supporting us, we're not very good, whatever. Now it's it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how dedicated your fandom is. It doesn't matter any of that. It's just about some bottom line to an owner. I feel like you're playing with fire with that attitude because like you have said, fandom is emotion-based. So if you start getting your fans not to care because it feels like their input doesn't matter, I think you're playing with fire.
And that's what I'm saying. I mean, so many of these are going to feel like empty threats. I mean, the Bears are also trying to get a brand new stadium. Theirs is pretty old in Chicago. They kind of want a dome stadium because, well, they play in a division where Detroit plays in a dome, Minnesota plays in a dome now. Green Bay is always going to play at Lambeau because it's just going to always be their stadium. But the Bears are looking around being like, well, fuck, maybe we need to be indoors because the rest of our division's starting to be indoors. And
they've never had a quarterback for how long? Because the wind is just ruined.
Exactly.
Everyone.
I mean, they just drafted one of the best prospects at quarterback in a long time. I also would want to get my ass inside as quickly as I could with the offense you're building. But these long-standing franchises, and the NFL doesn't seem to do it very much because I don't think the NFL tolerates this bullshit a lot. Just trying to really penny pinch and be cheap about it. Because the NFL gets really pretentious. I mean, NFL ownership's kind of gross and Goodell's pretty gross. But they don't really fuck around with a lot of these things. It's no, they have a pretty steady group of really old white guys that have owned these franchises for a long time. And there's not a lot of relocation in the NFL. I mean, especially now that LA is filled with two teams, that was the one that we got held everybody's head for how fucking long?
20 years.
Yeah, And that was because you were missing a team in the biggest market on the West Coast, and that was just idiotic that you didn't have a team there. And it all worked itself out, and St. Louis got screwed. But they're the only ones who really got screwed out of that. I mean, Oakland, the Raiders probably needed to get out of Oakland. Again, the fact that the Chargers are in L.A. and the Raiders are not is just batshit stupidity. The Chargers could have gone anywhere else in the world, and it wouldn't have mattered. The Raiders should have stayed in L.A. I guess the Chargers could have gone to Vegas. But point being, that was the first relocation of football stuff we'd had. I mean, shit, I'd have to look really.
The Browns, Ravens.
Yeah, exactly. You go. Baltimore got screwed by the Colts going to Indy. Baltimore eventually got a team back with the Browns. They expanded with the Browns, and I mean, you could dive Houston. I think Houston technically was the Chiefs franchise moved out of Houston years and years and years ago. Then they had the Oilers who left for Tennessee, but those aren't. I feel like maybe there is more than I'm thinking of, but just seems like they're not really more no nonsense about this. And I'm just curious, are they going to take the Bears and the Chiefs bullshit? Because those teams are not the Carolina Panthers, who could uproot and leave Carolina. There'd be a lot of people who were sad, but that teams exist at Jacksonville. Jacksonville plays 1 or 2 home games in London because no one gives a shit down there when they added that franchise. The Bears and Chiefs, those are, I mean, among the top 8 like most historical franchises in the league?
Yeah.
I don't imagine they're going to deal with that bullshit very easily.
And you can't threaten to leave the Chicago market.
Like, yeah.
Hey, we're gonna go move to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay as a team. You know, we're gonna move to Montana. Like,
yeah.
You know, you don't have that ability because there's not major cities that'll take you in that sense. So they kind of are playing with fire in that. Like, they can call your bluff.
Yeah.
Basically.
We're gonna go. You're gonna go to St. Louis. That's the only option. Like, what major city doesn't have an NFL team at this point? There's major cities missing in the NBA. The NHL even more so because you expand out to Canada. Baseball's got plenty of places that would love to move their AAA teams up to a major league team. What are you looking for in the NFL? Where do you want to go? There's nowhere to go. It's like, I mean, the Vegas is filled, LA is filled. What are you going to go be a team in London or Mexico City? It doesn't work that way.
No.
It's interesting because, I mean, there are obviously examples of relocation over the last couple of decades, but it feels like it really tapered off compared to like the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
When it was just sort of expected that maybe a team in one major sports league or another was going to change almost every year. And you have to wonder, especially in the case of the NBA and the NFL, which, again, have a couple of relocations, but not much. If it was just, guys, we have a good thing going here. We've never been more popular. Our TV deals are phenomenal. Maybe let's not fuck with that.
Yeah.
And you have to assume there was some internal pressure from whichever commissioner at the time with the owners of each of those two leagues to be like, look, we're going to make money hand over fist. So, like, maybe you don't love your current situation, but, like, let's just shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Because everybody's riding this mountain of cash. So if we could just not fall off that mountain, that would be terrific.
And that's what's funny about the NFL is they leave one city, they put an expansion team back in it. Again, the only city I can think of that had a team that doesn't is Oakland and St. Louis. Those are the ones that just most recently lost their teams, basically, for stadium issues. And again, I mean, Oakland's a weird spot because, again, the Niners are right there and San Francisco is right there, and those two major cities are right next to each other. So it's a little bit weirder of like, do you actually need a team in both markets and all that? Granted, the Niners don't even play in San Francisco. They play in Santa Clara, so it's actually a whole different issue. But like St. Louis, to me, is the only team sitting in the NFL who got fucked. They've made it right in Baltimore. They made it right in Houston. They made it right in L.A. And again, I also don't count San Diego because I don't know. The Chargers they used to be the Los Angeles Chargers years and years ago, if I remember right, and then they moved to San Diego and moved back up. And so, like, most of those cities got their teams back. I think the NBA is pretty similar. I don't know how many markets have lost a team that they held for a while and then didn't get one back.
Seattle. That's the main one.
Seattle.
It's the next spot.
And they're gonna get one. I mean, like, soon enough. We dicked around with Charlotte and New Orleans and that whole situation, bouncing back and forth.
They got their team back.
They got their team back. They got their name back. I mean, like, typically you've gone back. If the city really deserves it and earns it, you're gonna get one back. For the most part. Again, hockey's all over the place. There's been so many damn relocations and renamings and mergings and shit. It's all over the place. And baseball is actually just as bad. I mean, there's been like 2 or 3 different versions of the Washington Senators and Nationals in D.C. in the past 40 years. I believe there's been 3 franchises that were basically there. So, and then they've left cities and come back. That one's, they try to mostly like make it right. And so I'm like, so you're going to hijack these arguments and say, well, if you don't give us this, we're going to leave. It's like, okay, well, then another rich dude might be like, oh shit, Chicago doesn't have an NFL team anymore. I have $2 billion. I'll just buy it. I just get an expansion team, or I'll buy the Jags or the fucking Panthers or some shit. I'm just going to move them back to Chicago. Like, Those markets aren't going to stay open if you actually were to follow through with the threat. And in the long run, you're going to be worse off. There's no way. So just more cities need to call the bluffs of a lot of this stuff for the teams that are actually making money. Again, Glendale just straight up was like, we don't care anymore. This isn't worth it. I think the other bigger cities are like, you need to stand up and be like, no, man, we're not going to do this. And I'm sure somebody will show back up with a team short enough anyway.
Its precedent has been set, which I'm happy to see, because like for a while there, from the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, it seemed like everybody realized, oh man, all I have to do is threaten to leave and I can just get hundreds of millions of dollars of public money. Well, why wouldn't I? Yeah. And from a human, if you're trying to be a moral person, it doesn't work at all. But if you're just trying to be a businessman, of course, you'd be an idiot not to. Like, to be competitive and actually run in that market, you have to get that. There's no other option.
The one that bugs the shit out of me is Atlanta for the Braves. They had Turner Field that wasn't even that old. It was basically, they used it for the Olympics in 96 or whatever it was. They already have a new fucking stadium. Their stadium lasted like 20-something years. And there's just this weird middle ground where so many teams have historic stadiums that will never need to get replaced. The Dodgers are never going to leave Dodger Stadium. Cubs never leave in Wrigley. Red Sox never leave in Fenway. You're going to have to make money and adjust those stadiums to make them so. But there's like a history to that. Green Bay is never going to leave Lambeau. They will be in Lambeau Field until the day and just keep doing their own weird investment strategy of putting money into it. These teams aren't leaving those stadiums. But then there's this middle ground where everyone has like 30 to 40-year-old stadiums, and everyone's like, well, these suck, and we don't have any like historic prestige in them, so we want to get the fuck out of these crappy things and move into something else. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, I don't know. I guess it's the whole like, well, is it a vacation destination and things like that? Of like, do you want to come from out of town? It's like, otherwise, your fans are your fans. Your fans aren't going to give a shit if Chase Field isn't pristinely perfect for the concessions that are in there. The people are just going to go to the fucking game. Just win. That's really, like, if you want to take your money and invest it in something, just invest it in winning, as opposed to, I'm going to give $100 million, so I want the city to give me $300 million so we can have the $400 million upgrades.
I mean, look, like I said in the beginning, there's an argument for some public money going into it, because it does bring in revenue. It's just when it's a quarter of it being the team and 3/4 of it being the city, that's where you run into an issue. If you want to flip those ratios, and because stadiums need upkeep, there's no doubt about that. Like, you have to put money into it. They're public arenas that can be used for a multitude of things, as long as there's good revenue sharing. But for so long, owners had the city over the barrel, and it seems like the cities have kind of taken that back, which is really refreshing to see in a way.
Yeah, I guess since winning is the elixir for all ills, I guess the ones that are more desperate are the ones that don't win and therefore need some kind of fancy stadium experience. They need a 300-foot tall scoreboard. They need, virtual reality, augmented reality shit. They need lounges and whatever the fuck else, right? I guess.
Right field.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. But at the same time, I'm like, it sort of just feels like an extension of. I mean, the last couple of times I've gone even to a Suns game, there's a little part of me that's like, you don't trust that I'm not fucking stupid, which is why you're constantly doing something on every timeout. You're constantly blaring music, this, that, and the other thing. It's sort of the same thing with the idea behind the franchise as a whole, where it's like, just take care of the on-field product, and I'll be there. I don't need to have a fancy stadium experience. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. It's cool to see, when Chase first opened, the giant fucking scoreboard in center field was a big thing at the time. That was kind of cool to go and see, right? But it wasn't why I kept going back. I kept going back because I wanted to watch the Diamondbacks. But for some owners, I think it's just, well, we got to get those cattle in there somehow, so let's just figure it out, throw money or whatever, and see what sticks.
And I feel like the thing I've read or seen people use as the excuse is the viewing experience on television is so good now with how good TVs are and how big TVs are, how cheap TVs are. I mean, shit, we can buy a 70-inch TV for like $800 and in super high definition and watch it and all that. It's like, well, yeah, the regular day-to-day viewing experience, I mean, speaking from experience, the NFL sucks to go watch in person. It's so much better on TV. It's easily the worst sport. In my opinion, quite crazy as it is, hockey's easily the best sport to watch in person and kind of one of the worst ones to watch on TV. If I'm being honest, I really like going to hockey in person because the puck's just going nonstop. The experience is really, really immersive. Baseball is in that weird middle ground where there's so much fucking downtime and then they've shortened games and all that. Try to make it work to where it's like, Chris is right. How bored do you get at a game if you're not actually invested in the game itself? Well, there's you people who are diehard Suns fans want to go to just watch the game. I go to a Dodger game, and anyone who fucking speaks pisses me off because I'm like, I'm watching the game. Stop fucking bouncing beach balls and shit. Fuck off. I want to watch the game for the $80 I spent to be here. But like between ticket prices going up and TV shit, it does feel like they're like, well, what can we do to make you like what weird burger or hot dog can we get on our menu to make you want to pay $25 or $30 to have the right to pay $20 more to buy the fucking thing? It's like, I don't give a shit if your mascots running around. And I get it for younger audiences and children. The games are fun, the mascots are fun, and that totally makes sense to have a family type atmosphere. But that, to me, is such a small subset of the people you're bringing in to Suns games, for example. The franchise has been there for so long, and I know, obviously, the playoffs didn't go well now, but you've been consistently good for a couple years now. The whole reason to go to the game is because the team's good, and you're watching really fucking good players.
Well, and when your ticket cost for a lower level seat is 3 figures for each ticket minimum, and usually it's more than that. When you mentioned $800 TV, or I could just go bring my family to one Suns game.
Exactly.
Like, it's tough to really have the idea that, oh, there's gonna be a family atmosphere. It's like, yeah, but how many families are dropping that for the? It's tough in that sense.
I mean, you would know better than obviously any of us. Of just, is it worth, like, it's almost better when the Suns were terrible because your kids could go for cheap, but then they don't have the investment of the fun atmosphere because everyone's quiet the whole time because you're losing by 30.
One of the first texts I got from a friend of mine about the Suns when they lost was, well, at least maybe it'll be cheaper next year. I'm like, oh, great. Lovely. I hate this.
It's like, I mean, I don't know where the sweet spot is of like what market, like a smaller-ish, medium-sized market that needs to try and keep costs down because people don't have a lot of money in that market versus, and then trying to keep fans engaged because they're a middling franchise. Like, I don't know why it's really mean, but like my mind goes to like the Seattle Mariners, who are like perpetually like a 500 team in a market that just only got hockey back, doesn't have basketball, and again, football I just don't include. It's its own thing. Like, that feels like that type of franchise that's like perpetually mediocre to struggling for the playoffs. That's kind of the place where I'm like, okay, yeah, you kind of do need to do some goofy shit to get people engaged. I don't want the Dodgers doing goofy shit. You're the best team in the league. I'm just going to come fucking watch all the superstars you signed and traded for. And that's all I care about in those situations. I guess it's just a weird middle ground for what works best for each city.
And we're not exactly the target demographic in the sense that we're all hardcore fans of our respective fandoms. So like, it doesn't necessarily play the same. But when I do go to a game live, I think to myself, I'm paying attention when the ball is live. So like, when there is a timeout, it's kind of a chance for me to go, okay, like, I'm going to shut my brain off for a bit. Let's look at that text message I got when play was happening. Let's talk to the people with us. Like, that's my time to do that. I don't need to have 400 decibel music playing during those stretches. I don't need to have animals doing backflips at center court. I don't. But for casual fans who are not us, I suppose there is something to it. It's just frustrating to me because it's like, when you are successful, I just don't feel like you need the hoops, as you're saying. I just think back to when I think back to all my in-stadium experiences, I don't remember almost any of them being from what was not the on-court or on-field product.
Maybe the Red Panda at halftime. That might be the exception.
I mean, she's cool. Maybe like the Randy Johnson retirement ceremony. There's some halftime stuff with like the Ring of Honor for the Suns. Like, but even then, those are still team related. They're not entertainment related.
But like, Red Panda just needs a basketball court. You don't need the suites or fancy arena or shit. The basketball court's always going to fucking exist. She can perform on it. Randy Johnson retired. He's just going to be on the field. Like, that's what I mean. I guess we're, again, not only are we not the target audience for these type of stadium things in terms of being diehard fans who are going to buy moderately priced tickets with a good view. But I'm like, well, we don't go sit in the suites. We don't go sit in the box club things where the fancier menu is available, or a waiter comes and brings you your food to you while you're sitting in the crowd and shit like that. We just don't really do a whole lot of that. And that's just a weird demographic where I'm like, are you sure that's really fan based, or is that corporate sponsors that you want happy in your luxury seating who will keep giving you sponsorship money as opposed to actual ticket revenue? And that's where the Coyotes ran into a massive issue, was in fucking Mullet in the 5,000 seat thing. Not only were they not making ticket revenue because they were selling out most of those games because the view is amazing. There's no club seating. There's no suite seating. Like, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of them, I guess, but it's like, I mean, I worked for a college. I know what a college arena looks like, even a really nice one. There's not a lot of suites and stuff that you've built into those. So the revenue of sponsorship and shit is already handicapped because you're not in your own arena that you own. You're at ASU's arena. So you can't really put a bunch of shit on the ice necessarily the same way you normally would be able to. But also, you're not generating like, oh, we're going to have whatever Phoenix Corporation is going to be up in the suite tonight. We need to schmooze them as much as possible so they give us $1 million for a sponsorship deal or some shit like that. They were losing that type of revenue too. And I guess that's where a lot of this comes from, is who are you actually trying to make the game day experience best for? It's not really your diehard fans because, again, they're coming. because they care
Or
about
they
your
watch
team and they've
MTV.
cared about it for decades. It's sponsorship money and the rich elite vibe of who you're drawing in, which again, I just keep going back to. Vegas did such a good job. I'm sure there's suites and there's standing room only seats, but that fucking arena is filled with people who give a shit about the hockey team that you put on the ice that's really good because they never had a team to cheer for before. It's the fucking model for what teams relocating or expanding or whatever need to follow. And you can't expect them to win a championship or whatever. Like, I don't know that the Utah whatever they're going to be are going to win right away up in Utah or in Salt Lake. They're going to win soon because that fucking roster started getting good. And with some actual management doing it correctly, that team might be really good right away, and it's going to really suck for Phoenix people who were the fans who didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, that maybe is one of the most frustrating parts. They're on an upward trajectory finally with some good young talent, and that talent's going to be actualized elsewhere.
Yep.
As a Utah Yeti or a Utah Blizzard or whatever the fuck they're going to call that.
Utah Ice. That's a horrible nickname. Just a great failure of a nickname if you name it the Utah Ice.
Tonight, the Kings take on the Ice on the ice.
Oh, God. Yeti seems to be getting a lot of traction for whatever reason. I don't know why. Whatever. Blizzard seems to be pretty popular too. I'm like, we already have Avalanche, guys, and you're also like the closest franchise to the Avalanche.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe be a little bit more individual. I mean, like, Seattle did a really good job. They're the fucking Kraken. Nothing's really similar to that. It's a weird nickname, but it ended up, I think, working pretty well. The Golden Knights presentation of the whole games is amazing in that arena with the whole night fucking vibe they do, and then mixing night NIGHT with like Las Vegas Knights and like the medieval theme. They fucking got it down. So hopefully Utah doesn't fuck this up because it's the only thing they got to lock down now to make sure this team succeeds.
Yeah, the Golden Knights name was inspired. I remember the time being like, so you got the gold aspect with casinos and shit. You got the nighttime, which is Vegas to a T. But then you can do this, like you said, medieval iconography with it. I mean,
and a city that's built on shows and presentations. I mean, the whole thing is they got a golden knight guy and a little like assistant knight guy run down there with swords fighting off the projection onto the ice before every game. It's the coolest shit. I wish I didn't like it because I don't like the fucking team, but I want to go. I mean, I went to both Kings Knights games in Vegas this year because it was worth to drive out there because I couldn't go to Phoenix anymore for cheap. It was cheaper to drive all the way to Vegas for Vegas's team's ticket prices than it was to go down to Tempe. And I'm like, well, also, like, this is just the whole vibe of this thing is super fun.
I suppose I'll always have a soft spot for the 2000-ish era Coyotes. They would play Werewolves in London when they scored a goal, and it was just felt like it was fun. It was new. It was exciting because TV sucked more back then.
Yep.
The only choice you really had was to see it live. I only got to go to one back then as a kid, but like that's a memory I'll cherish because I really liked that team. That's 20 years ago, more so, but like still gonna miss them a little bit. It's a little sad.
I have had plans for years upon years when I moved, especially when I moved to Glendale. I live 10 minutes from the stadium, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna get to a game. And then my wife got pregnant. I'm like, well, we want to have some drinks and stuff, so we're not gonna go. Then COVID happened. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're not going. Then they moved to Tempe. I'm like, well, fuck, this is never gonna happen now.
Yep, it was destined.
It was destined to fail.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Next week, I think we have a full cast. And then we're going to be off the following week. We'll talk more about that then. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're in between episodes and you're looking for stuff to do, you can go to our website, grayareas.live, or youtube.com/@grayareaslive. That's where the live stream happens. You can join in. You can be in the chat. Most of the people who are usually in our chat were all at the concert tonight. So thank you for not watching. But for everybody else,
the whole show just fell on deaf ears.
That's right. Well, I mean, there's people who listen to it on Thursday when they get the regular episode too. They don't know. They don't know.
That's true. Well, join us on Tuesday next time.
Yeah, join us on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Arizona time, live. Be in the chat. We'll put your messages on the screen. You can be like a celebrity. It's cool. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week.